I'm Jamie, 32, male, and I orchestrated a situation where my coworker, Mark, a man who boasted he could have any woman he wanted, found himself facing one he absolutely could not handle. The air in our marketing department often felt thick with Mark's self-importance, a palpable presence that clung to every conversation like cheap cologne. He was 35, a sales director, and carried himself with an unwarranted swagger that grated on every nerve in my body. His smile, typically reserved for clients or upper management, was a practiced, almost predatory flash of teeth that promised nothing but self-interest. He genuinely believed he was irresistible, a fact he took great pains to remind us of. Constantly. My desk was just a few cubicles down from his, close enough to hear his endless boasts and casual dismissals of women. It wasn't just idle chatter. It was a deeply ingrained philosophy for him. He saw women not as individuals, but as puzzles to solve, conquests to claim. For years, I'd endured his thinly veiled misogyny, watching him work his charm on every new female hire, every visiting client, even the baristas at the coffee shop downstairs. He treated it like a game, a sport, and he was the undisputed champion in his own mind. One particularly galling incident involved Sarah from accounting, a quiet, brilliant woman who kept to herself but was fiercely dedicated to her work. Mark had decided she was his next target. For weeks, he'd hover around her desk, making insincere compliments about her focus or offering to explain complex financial reports she had clearly mastered years ago. He once cornered her by the water cooler, loudly declaring, "Sarah, a woman like you, so sharp, needs a man who truly appreciates that intellect, someone who isn't intimidated." Sarah, to her credit, just gave him a blank stare, said, "I appreciate competence, Mark, not condescension," and walked away. Mark, however, spun it into a tale of her playing hard to get, a challenge he was eager to overcome. He even confided in me, grinning, "She's just testing me, Jamie. They always do. But they all fall eventually." My stomach churned with disgust. Then there was the time with Emily, a talented graphic designer who had recently joined our team. Mark saw her creativity as an opening for his advances. He'd critique her designs, not to offer helpful feedback, but to suggest she needed a male perspective to truly shine. He'd invite her to brainstorming sessions that always ended up being thinly disguised attempts at a date. One afternoon, he tried to put his arm around her in the break room, supposedly to show her something on his phone. Emily, a small but fiercely independent woman, smoothly ducked under his arm, picked up her coffee, and said, "Hands off, Mark, unless you want me to accidentally spill this scorching hot latte." The entire break room went silent. Mark, flustered, laughed it off with a fake bravado, but I could see the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Later, he told me she was feisty, but that he loved a good chase. I just nodded, biting back the retort forming on my tongue. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern, a continuous thread of disrespectful behavior that wove through the fabric of our office life. Mark was good at his job, charming to clients, and had a knack for schmoozing upper management, so his internal antics were largely overlooked or, worse, seen as harmless, Mark being Mark. Many of our male colleagues either laughed along with him or ignored it, afraid to challenge someone so entrenched in the company hierarchy. Even some women, sadly, seemed to tolerate it, perhaps out of fear of rocking the boat or just weary resignation, but I couldn't. Each leering glance, each casual dismissal of a woman's intelligence, each boast about his supposed conquests chipped away at my patience. It wasn't just about his arrogance. It was about the insidious way he devalued half the workforce. I longed for a way to deflate his enormous ego, to show him that not everyone was a pawn in his tiresome game. Direct confrontation felt futile. He'd just spin it or dismiss me as jealous. A formal complaint would be an uphill battle, likely leading to a slap on the wrist and making me the troublemaker. I needed something subtle, something that would use his own arrogance against him, a karmic boomerang that would send his boasts hurtling back to hit him squarely in the face. My mind, usually occupied with marketing strategies and campaign analytics, slowly began to formulate a different kind of plan, one based on a deeply personal desire for justice. The catalyst came on a Tuesday morning during our weekly sales and marketing huddle. Mark, fresh off closing a major deal, was particularly insufferable. He leaned back in his chair, a smug smirk plastered across his face, holding court, while our department head, Mr. Harrison, seemed to revel in his star performer's theatrics. The conversation, as it often did when Mark was feeling victorious, veered into his favorite territory, his supposed prowess with women. "Honestly," he began, gesturing grandly with his coffee cup, "it's a simple formula. Confidence, a bit of charm, and knowing what they want to hear. I tell you, put any woman in front of me, and I can have her eating out of the palm of my hand within an hour." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, clearly expecting awe. "Several junior sales." Reps chuckled nervously. Mr. Harrison just nodded, a slight, indulgent smile on his lips. My blood ran cold. Any woman? The sheer audacity of it, the profound disrespect for half the human population, was infuriating. It wasn't just a boast. It was a declaration of ownership, a claim of universal dominion over female autonomy. I looked around the room, hoping for anyone, to challenge him, but everyone averted their gaze, fiddling with their pens or staring intently at their laptops. The silence was deafening, a tacit agreement with his disgusting worldview. That was it, the final straw. A quiet fury ignited within me, colder and more resolute than any anger I'd felt before. I wasn't just frustrated anymore. I was determined. Mark needed a lesson, a fundamental reevaluation of this self-proclaimed formula, and it wouldn't come from a lecture or a complaint. It would come from experience, a bitter pill he'd have to swallow himself. My mind raced, filtering through possibilities. Who could withstand Mark's onslaught? Who would not only repel him, but do so in a way that truly exposed his shallow tactics? It couldn't be someone already known to actively dislike him, as that would look like a setup. It couldn't be someone easily intimidated, or someone who might inadvertently reinforce his charm by even a polite interaction. I needed someone intelligent, discerning, with an unshakable sense of self. Someone who wouldn't just say no, but would make him question why his formula failed. Later that week, the answer walked into our office. Not into our department, but into the adjacent IT division. Her name was Sophia. I first saw her during a cross-departmental meeting about a new software implementation. She was a software engineer, new to the company, tasked with explaining some complex back-end processes to a room full of bewildered marketing and sales staff. Unlike many tech professionals who might shy away from public speaking, Sophia commanded the room with quiet confidence. She spoke clearly, succinctly, breaking down intricate concepts into understandable terms without ever condescending. Her presentation wasn't flashy, it was simply brilliant. She answered questions with a thoughtful precision, her gaze direct, her composure unshaken even when senior managers challenged her points. There was an understated strength about her, an intellectual rigor that was immediately apparent. She wore no makeup, dressed simply, and her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She relied entirely on her competence, not on any superficial adornments. I watched her, fascinated. She deflected a particularly convoluted question from our head of sales with such elegant logic that he actually stammered and apologized. There was no flirtation, no attempt to charm, just pure, unadulterated intelligence and a calm resolve. After the meeting, I caught snippets of conversations about her. Brilliant, sharp as a tack, doesn't suffer fools gladly. These were exactly the traits I was looking for. She was a fortress of intellect and self-respect, impervious to the kind of superficial flattery Mark thrived on. She wasn't just smart. She was perceptive, capable of seeing through facades, and utterly unimpressed by arrogance. A plan, subtle yet potent, began to form in my mind. Mark wanted to take any woman he wanted. I would give him Sophia. Not as a prize, but as a mirror that would not reflect his distorted image of himself as an irresistible charmer, but would instead reflect the true, insecure, and ugly reality of his character back at him. The thought brought a grim satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge in the typical sense. It was about balance, about dismantling a harmful delusion, and about subtle, undeniable justice. Sophia wasn't a tool. She was the immovable object to Mark's irresistible force, and I couldn't wait to watch the collision. My plan wasn't about direct intervention, but about creating the perfect environment for Mark's own hubris to trip him up. I didn't need to do much, just gently tilt the playing field. The key was plausibility, ensuring that any interaction between Mark and Sophia seemed entirely natural, organic, and driven by circumstance, not by my deliberate design. The first opportunity presented itself through a new company-wide initiative, a cross-functional task force focused on improving interdepartmental communication. Specifically between marketing, sales, and IT, it was a tedious project, mostly about streamlining email protocols and shared document systems, but it was perfect. I knew Sophia would be assigned to it, given her role in IT and her reputation for clear communication. And, predictably, Mark, as a sales director, would also be appointed to represent his department. I made sure to subtly volunteer for it myself, citing my interest in efficiency, knowing it would place me squarely in the observation seat. The first task force meeting was exactly what I'd hoped for. Mark, ever the showman, arrived late, making a grand entrance with a casual apology. He then proceeded to dominate the initial discussion with anecdotes and broad, unhelpful statements, clearly trying to establish himself as the alpha in the room. Sophia, on the other hand, was all business. She sat quietly, taking notes occasionally. Interjecting with precise, technical questions that cut through the fluff, I watched Mark's initial approach. He tried his usual charm offensive, leaning slightly towards Sophia whenever she spoke, nodding exaggeratedly and offering compliments like, "That's a remarkably insightful point, Sophia." Very analytical. His tone dripped with patronizing admiration. Sophia's response was a polite, unsmiling, "Thank you," her gaze already returning to her laptop. There was no blush, no flutter, no hint of being impressed. Just cool, professional acknowledgement. Mark seemed momentarily thrown, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before he quickly regained his composure, likely dismissing her demeanor as mere shyness over the next few weeks. As the task force continued its meetings, I observed their interactions. I made sure to occasionally praise Sophia's contributions in group settings, subtly reinforcing her competence in a way that Mark couldn't easily dismiss. For instance, if Sophia proposed a technical solution, I might add, "That's brilliant, Sophia. It simplifies the whole process significantly." Mark would often chime in with something like, "Yes, very clever. You engineers certainly have a way with algorithms, don't you?" His tone was still condescending, but I could see Sophia barely registering it, treating it as background noise. Mark, being Mark, naturally escalated his efforts. He started finding excuses to collaborate with Sophia outside the meetings. He'd wander over to her desk in IT, ostensibly to ask a question about the new system, but lingering longer than necessary, leaning on her cubicle wall with a casual pose. I'd overhear snippets of their conversations. "So, Sophia," Mark would begin, his voice lowered, trying for intimacy. "I was thinking after work maybe we could grab a drink. Discuss some of these technical challenges in a more relaxed setting." Sophia's reply would be polite, firm, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Thank you, Mark, but I have other commitments. If you have questions about the system, my office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays, or you can email me." Her voice was even, her eyes fixed on her screen. I watched Mark's shoulders slump slightly each time, his practiced smile faltering for a split second before snapping back into place. He'd then try a different tack. "You're different from other women in tech, Sophia. So focused, so dedicated." Is that a compliment, Mark, or an observation? Sophia would reply without looking up, her fingers still flying across her keyboard. He'd laugh, a hollow sound. "Just an observation, of course. I admire it." But the admiration felt forced, tinged with a growing irritation. My internal satisfaction was immense. I saw him running through his playbook, hitting every single one of his usual moves, and watching them all bounce off Sophia like rubber balls off a steel wall. His initial overconfidence was slowly giving way to confusion, then to a subtle, almost imperceptible annoyance. He wasn't used to this. His formula was failing and he didn't know why. He hadn't encountered a woman who simply wasn't impressed, wasn't flattered, and certainly wasn't available for his taking. He hadn't met a woman who truly couldn't be handled. As the weeks bled into a month, Mark's frustration became increasingly palpable. His usual confident swagger seemed to deflate slightly whenever Sophia was in the vicinity. He'd try harder, his tactics becoming more transparent, almost desperate. His initial smooth lines morphed into clumsy attempts at flattery, then into thinly veiled attempts to undermine her professionalism. He was like a broken record, playing the same worn-out tune to an audience that simply didn't care for it. During one task force meeting, Sophia presented a highly efficient solution for data sharing. It was elegant, robust, and would save us countless hours. Mark, instead of acknowledging its merit, tried to find a flaw. "That's all very theoretical, Sophia," he sneered. "But in the real world, with real clients, we need something more. Adaptable, more human." Sophia met his gaze, completely unfazed. "The system is designed for adaptability, Mark. Its human interface is intuitive, and the back-end supports scalable growth. Perhaps you could elaborate on what specific aspect you find inhuman or theoretical." Her tone was calm, logical, and left no room for his vague criticisms. Mark stammered, unable to provide a concrete answer, and quickly changed the subject, muttering about nuance. The entire room felt the awkwardness, and I saw a few colleagues exchange glances. A silent acknowledgement of Mark's flailing. Outside of meetings, his persistence became an open secret. He'd corner Sophia by the coffee machine, by the printer, even at the entrance to the building. He tried inviting her to networking events that were clearly thinly disguised dates. "There's a great industry mixer next week," he'd purr. "I thought you might benefit from the connections. We could go together." Sophia would simply smile politely, a small, unreadable smile, and reply, "Thank you, Mark, but I prefer to network through official channels or events relevant to my specific field." "I'm afraid that doesn't quite fit." She never made excuses. She just stated her professional boundaries clearly and unequivocally. It was magnificent to watch. She wasn't aggressive, she wasn't defensive. She was simply impermeable. Mark's inability to crack Sophia started affecting his demeanor in other areas. He became more irritable, snapping at junior staff, and his usual charming client calls occasionally devolved into frustrated sighs when he thought no one was listening. He'd vent to Chris and me, oblivious to the fact that I was the architect of his misery. "She's impossible, Jamie," he'd grumble, pacing our shared office space. "Just cold. I've never met a woman like her. It's like she deliberately avoids any personal interaction." Chris, bless his heart, would just offer a non-committal grunt, but his eyes would dart to me, a knowing flicker there. He understood what was happening, and I could tell he was enjoying Mark's slow-motion downfall. As much as I was. We had both been subjected to Mark's ego for far too long. What fascinated me most was Sophia's consistent composure. She never engaged in office gossip about Mark, never complained to HR, and never resorted to outright rudeness. Her resistance was a masterclass in professional detachment. She treated Mark as she would any other colleague, but one whose advances she simply did not entertain. She had a way of using his own words or assumptions against him, not aggressively but with an almost surgical precision. One afternoon, Mark, visibly agitated after yet another failed attempt to get Sophia to join him for lunch, muttered loudly, "Enough for several people to hear. Some women just don't know a good thing when it's staring them in the face. Too focused on their little spreadsheets to see what's actually important." Sophia, walking past at that exact moment, paused. She turned to him, her expression perfectly neutral. "Mark," she said calmly, "I assure you my spreadsheets are incredibly important. They contain the data that drives our operational efficiency, which I believe is quite critical to the company's good things. Is there a specific operational issue you'd like me to address?" Mark's face flushed a deep crimson. He spluttered, No, I just meant, dive." Sophia merely nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her head. Indeed. And my life choices are equally important. Good day, Mark. And she walked away, leaving him standing there, utterly deflated, a defeated expression briefly replacing his usual smirk. The whispers in the office were no longer about Mark's conquests, but about his strange, uncharacteristic struggle with the new IT girl. Colleagues who had once indulged his antics were now giving him curious, even pitying glances. His aura of invincibility was cracking, and it was a sight to behold. Jamie watched, a quiet sense of triumph blooming in his chest. The trap was set, and Mark was meticulously, obliviously, walking deeper into it. The atmosphere in the office began to shift noticeably. Mark, once the loud, boisterous center of attention in the sales wing, was becoming increasingly subdued, his usual bravado replaced by a simmering resentment. The whispers about his unusual behavior with Sophia grew louder, crossing departmental lines. People weren't just noticing his frustration. They were starting to see the ugly side of him that had always been there, just masked by his practiced charm. His formula wasn't just failing. It was backfiring spectacularly. His frustration boiled over during the mid-project review for the cross-functional task force. The meeting was in a larger conference room, with several department heads present, including Mr. Harrison and the head of IT, Mrs. Jenkins, who had personally vouched for Sophia. Sophia delivered her section of the presentation flawlessly, outlining the progress, the challenges overcome, and the projected benefits with her usual clarity and precision. She even included a new, innovative solution she had developed to integrate two previously incompatible systems, a development that promised significant savings when it was time for questions. Mark, instead of addressing the project, turned to Sophia with a sneer. "Sophia," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "your technical skills are clearly adequate. But don't you think you might be overthinking some of these processes? Sometimes a more human touch, a bit of intuition, is what's really needed rather than just raw data. For people who understand the softer side of business." The room went silent. It was a thinly veiled attack on her capabilities, cloaked as a generalized philosophical point. More than that, it was a direct public insult intended to belittle her intelligence and her approach. Sophia didn't falter. She looked at Mark with a steady, unflinching gaze. "Mark," she said, her voice calm and level, "my role is to ensure the systems function optimally and securely, delivering measurable results based on data, not intuition. Perhaps you could clarify how a softer side approach would enhance data integrity or system efficiency in this context?" She paused, allowing his unsupported criticism to hang in the air. "Or are you suggesting that a lack of intuition on my part has led to an observable flaw in the technical solution I've presented?" Mark's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He had expected her to stammer, to blush, to retreat. Instead, she had calmly and logically called him out, turning his vague insult into a demand for specific, technical justification he couldn't provide. He spluttered, "No, I just mean ... people skills, it's all about people." Mrs. Jenkins, Sophia's manager, interjected smoothly, her voice firm. "Mark, Sophia's people skills are evident in her ability to communicate complex technical information to non-technical stakeholders as she's doing now. Her solution is sound and well received by all relevant parties." She turned to Sophia. "Excellent work, Sophia. Your innovative approach is exactly what we needed." Mr. Harrison, sensing the shift in the room's dynamic and the unspoken tension, quickly moved the meeting along. But the damage was done. Mark's public display of unprofessionalism, his clear attempt to belittle Sophia, was witnessed by several senior members of staff. His facade of charm had utterly crumbled, revealing the petty, insecure man beneath. I saw him after the meeting, pacing his cubicle, muttering to himself. He looked defeated, his eyes darting around as if expecting judgment. The constant rejections from Sophia, followed by this public dressing down, had clearly taken their toll. His colleagues, who usually laughed at his jokes, were now avoiding eye contact. The air around him felt colder, devoid of the forced bonhomie he usually exuded. Later that day, Chris pulled me aside. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his eyes wide. Mark totally lost it. Sophia just handled him. Didn't even break a sweat? He looked like a deflated balloon. "He certainly did," I replied, a small grim smile playing on my lips. Some people just can't handle being told no. I felt a deep satisfaction. My subtle orchestration was paying off. Mark was no longer just annoying. He was becoming a liability, and he was doing it all to himself. The cracks in his carefully constructed persona were now glaring fissures, visible for all to see. The incident in the review meeting was the point of no return for Mark. His public outburst, coupled with Sophia's composed response, had solidified a new narrative about him in the office. Not the charming sales hotshot, but the insecure bully who couldn't handle rejection. The whispers intensified and colleagues started giving him a wider berth. His attempts to regain his former standing were pathetic and only served to highlight his desperation. The next day, Mark didn't come in. Then the day after, rumors swirled. Some said he was sick, others on an urgent personal leave. I knew it was more than that. Chris overheard snippets of conversation from HR, hushed tones about professional conduct, and disciplinary reviews. It was clear Mark's behavior had finally crossed the line. His condescension towards Sophia in front of department heads was likely the final straw for management. When Mark finally returned, almost a week later, he was a shadow of his former self. His suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes held a haunted, almost paranoid look. He walked with a slump, no longer making eye contact, avoiding even Mr. Harrison. The air around him crackled with a distinct sense of defeat. He came to my cubicle late one afternoon, when most people had left. His voice was low, laced with a venomous mix of anger and disbelief. "You set me up, didn't you, Jamie?" he hissed, his eyes narrowed into slits. I looked up, feigning confusion. "Set you up for what, Mark?" "Sophia!" he spat, his voice rising slightly. That robot." "You knew she was like that, didn't you? You knew I couldn't handle her. As you so subtly put it earlier in the week, when you were encouraging me to get to know her better for the project." His tone was accusatory, his face contorted with rage. "You orchestrated this whole thing. You led me on, made me look like a fool." My heart thumped in my chest, but I maintained my poker face. "Mark," I said, my voice calm, almost sympathetic, "I encouraged you to collaborate with a talented new colleague for a cross-functional project. That's part of working in a team. What happened between you and Sophia, your interactions, your performance in that meeting, that was entirely on you. I had nothing to do with how you chose to conduct yourself." I let a hint of a smile touch my lips, a brief, almost imperceptible flicker of triumph. "Perhaps you just finally met someone who didn't play by your rules." His face purpled. He wanted to lash out, to deny, but he had no ground to stand on. His own words, his own actions were undeniable. He knew, deep down, that his formula had failed and that I had simply provided the stage for his self-destruction. The realization that he had been so easily manipulated, that his own arrogance was the weapon used against him, was the ultimate betrayal for him. It wasn't a physical wound, but a profound blow to his ego, a shattering of his self-image. "You're despicable," he muttered, turning away from me, his shoulders slumped. "Just call it justice, Mark," I replied softly, my voice barely audible above the hum of the office lights. He didn't respond, just walked away, defeated. The fallout for Mark was swift and decisive. Within days, an internal announcement stated that Mark would be transitioning into a new, more focused role that involved less client-facing interaction and no direct reports. It was a thinly veiled demotion, a quiet way of sidelining him, without a public firing. His office was moved to a remote corner of the building, away from the main sales floor. He became a ghost, present but invisible, his influence completely diminished. No more boisterous laughter, no more arrogant boasts. The power he once wielded, built on his charm and disregard for others, had evaporated. The atmosphere in the office immediately lightened. It was as if a heavy cloud had lifted. People seemed more relaxed, more collaborative. The quiet confidence of competent women like Sarah and Emily was no longer overshadowed by Mark's overbearing presence. My plan had worked. It wasn't about vengeance, but about restoring a balance, proving that arrogance and disrespect, when met with unwavering integrity, can indeed lead to one's own undoing. In the months that followed, the office felt like a different place. Mark, now relegated to his isolated corner, rarely made an appearance in common areas. When he did, his steps were quick, his head down, and his once booming voice reduced to a barely audible mumble. His charm, his confidence, his entire persona had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow shell. He was the living embodiment of a man who thought he could take any woman he wanted, only to be unequivocally, irrevocably, and publicly rejected by one he truly couldn't handle. The silent understanding that permeated the office was its own form of poetic justice. Sophia, on the other hand, thrived. Her reputation as a brilliant and capable engineer only grew. She continued her work with the same quiet competence and unshakable professionalism. She never spoke ill of Mark, never gloated, never even acknowledged the drama that had unfolded around her. She simply continued to excel, a testament to her inherent strength and dignity. I admired her immensely, her composure having been the unyielding force that shattered Mark's delusion. Our interactions remained professional, but there was an unspoken respect between us, a shared knowledge of what had transpired. For me, the entire experience was deeply satisfying. I never had to raise my voice, never had to file a complaint, and never risked my own professional standing. I simply created the conditions, laid the groundwork, and then let Mark's own character do the rest. It was a victory for subtlety, for strategy, and for the quiet defiance of those who refused to be diminished. The justice was all the more potent because it was self-inflicted. Mark, through his own arrogance and inability to adapt, had been his own undoing. I often reflect on that period, on the simmering frustration that had propelled me and the quiet satisfaction that followed. It wasn't about malice. It was about balance. It was about proving that treating people, especially women, as objects to be taken or conquered would eventually lead to a profound and undeniable reckoning. My role was merely to provide the catalyst, to introduce the immovable object to the unstoppable, yet ultimately fragile, force. And that's how I handled a coworker who thought he could take any woman he wanted. I gave him Sophia, a woman of unyielding intellect and self-respect, and watched as his entire world, built on a foundation of shallow boasts and misogynistic assumptions, crumbled under the weight of his own hubris. It was a lesson he desperately needed to learn, and one I was more than happy to facilitate. The silence that now filled the space where his loud boasts once echoed was the sweetest victory of all. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.